Hello, how are you doing today? Got my new setup today, so I just wanted to check in with you and see if everything's going all right. I don't like the video. It's not as crisp and clear as my last video. I'm going to have to work out that issue. But can all of you hear me clear enough? Sorry about yesterday's disaster. Oh my God, what a mess, right? That was a little bit disappointing. I guess what that means is I am not going to be able to live stream with my I'm not going to be able to live stream. Fantastic. Xiaoyun's checking in saying that she can hear everything loud and clear. This is my first time with the new setup. I switched to my office. Tell me what you think. Let's see, what is that? Yep. Ta-da! There you go. And so there's my new office. I've got the Surface Pro over on the far left. That's what I was streaming out of, but it apparently just didn't have enough processing speed to deal with it. Now I've switched to my office computers with my two screens here. The only thing that I'm worried about is I am right beside the air conditioning vent at Wake Tech. So I'd be curious to know how the sound is coming through at this point. Are you coming through at this point? Are you coming through at this point? Whoa, okay. All right, fantastic. So nobody's typing in the chat bar right now, which kind of worries me a little bit. Somebody go ahead and type in the chat bar and let me know that that's working properly. Fantastic. The sound is good too. Okay. Cheyenne's there and I'm there. Maybe that's all we have. All right. Good enough. Well, let's go ahead, if we can, and get started. So this is going to be my new corner screen. You'll notice I don't have the green screen behind me anymore. What you'll be able to see is the back part of my office with a bookshelf. But hopefully that'll be a pleasant enough background and won't be distracting. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Chapter 14, Socio-Emotional Development in Early Adulthood. We're going to talk a little bit about stability, love, stability and change from childhood to adulthood. Then I'm going to talk about attraction, love, and close relationships as they relate to adult functioning. And then we'll talk a little bit about marriage and functioning, marriage and the family. And then hopefully we'll finish up and I'll have time for a couple of questions regarding the midterm exam that we've got coming up. So I see Andre's checked in. Hello, Andre. Good to see you today. I've got my chat going up here on the left side of my Surface Pro, so I'm going to be looking from time to time over here. That's just me checking for chat questions. And when I look over to the right, I'm checking to make sure that our stream quality is coming through loud and clear. In fact, by looking at the CPU usage of my computer, it looks to me like the stream is coming through perfectly clear. In fact, it's so clear that I might even double the frame rate and make this video even a little bit sharper on the next lecture. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Stability and change from childhood to adulthood. One of the things developmental psychologists are interested in is understanding the pattern of change that occurs throughout the lifespan. And we typically think of that change as being unimodal. We have certain abilities that get better and better and peak at some age in our life, and then those same abilities begin to decrease as we approach death. So one of the things that developmental psychologists are interested in is looking at early patterns and how well they predict adult outcomes. So let's talk about the developmental questions of interest that are described in your textbook, okay? Temperament. If you remember, we talked about temperament is the forerunner of personality that shows up even within a few days of life. Some children cry and are harder to soothe. Other children are more exploratory and extroverted, right? And so, and some children are more cyclical in their behavior than are others. These early temperaments form the foundations of of our personality. And the question is, how well do they predict adult outcomes? And your book talks a little bit about the different types of early childhood temperaments that we talked about back in, I think it was in chapter 6, maybe. And they talk about how they relate to adult outcomes. So if you remember from earlier in cognitive development, infancy, we talked about the easy, difficult, and slow children trichotomy, to the inhibition, the inhibited versus uninhibited children, and those children who had effort control, and those children who were not able to control their emotions. So we talked about those as being 3 different comparisons of temperament styles. And your book revisits each of these 3 temperament models in chapter 14. So what they suggest to you that when it comes to easy, slow to warm up, or difficult children, kids who are easy children as infants tend to be better adjusted as adults than difficult children. So the easy children were rhythmic, generally had a positive attitude, and were very exploratory and easy to soothe. Your difficult children tended to have high energy levels and be difficult to soothe with mainly negative emotions. So what they're going to suggest to you is that these easy children are going to grow up to be more likely to be well adjusted. Now we talked about inhibited versus non-inhibited children. And I suggested to you that one of the things that you could do actually as a parent is coach your toddler out of inhibition. So inhibition at 18 months doesn't necessarily predict anything, but inhibition in early childhood, 3 and 4, that becomes predictive of later childhood outcomes. And what your book's going to suggest is that these inhibited children are slower to get jobs and have less career stability. All right, and then we talked about emotional control, and some kids that are able to control their temper and who have effortful control, and we compared them with children who do not have the ability to control their emotional responses, those kids that don't have effortful control. And what your book suggests is that children with poor emotional control at 6 are linked with higher levels of aggression and violent crime as adults. So these early temperamental differences do predict outcomes in early adulthood. Now, we also talked about attachment, and I talked to you about the strange situation experiment and how there were children who responded differently to being reunited with the caregiver. And we talked about secure children and who were easily able to establish a reattachment with the mom when she came back in the room, and those children who had insecure attachment styles, who had difficulty reestablishing attachment with mom once she came in after being away. And what your book's going to suggest is that secure attachment as a child predicts more stable relationships in adulthood and more stable romantic relationships in particular. We also talked about children who were avoidant and children who were anxious. So the children who were avoidant didn't really seem to enjoy intimacy or anxiety about the relationship. They sort of just detached from mom as a way of dealing with these feelings of anxiety. And your book suggests that avoidant attachment style as an infant predicts less pro-social or helping behavior as an adult. And if you look around and notice that some of your friends are more cooperative and helpful and willing to pitch in community situations, and other friends tend to be a little bit stingier with their time and effort, you might trace this back to attachment styles. Now, one of the things you do need to know, is attachment style your fate? Is that going to predict your adult relationship styles? Absolutely not. What your book actually suggests is that intervening events may actually be more important in determining our adult relationship patterns than attachment styles. So for example, you may have a securely attached child that goes through the death of a parent at an important age, and they may develop anxiety about the loss of this relationship, which leads to an insecure attachment style. On the other hand, you might have a child who grows up in an insecure relationship with a parent who might be suffering from a drug or alcohol problem or just another problem which makes them unable to be responsive to the child's need. You may have an infant that starts out with an insecure attachment style, but then they're placed with a warm, loving family as a 6, 7, 8-year-old, and they may actually build this sense of relationship trust back up. So what your book suggests is while attachment style may be important, especially secure versus non-secure attachment styles, what you really have to look at is the intervening period and any special traumatic events which change the kid's trajectory during the intervening time. Do I have any questions so far? I don't see, we don't have a lot going on in the chat bar, which is fine. I've got 4 viewers here, so it's a small but cool class. So we've got Xiaoyun, Andre. I don't know if Mel's here. If you're here, Mel, hello. It might be Erik. Who knows who's here? Now, Erikson also talked about this particular stage as a further development of the of identity, in a sense. Now, once you become I suggested to you that the difference between the identity and role confusion stage versus all the others is those others were sort of concrete, personal, sort of individual efficacy qualities, if you will, industry, autonomy, hope, just the basic building blocks. I suggested to you that starting with stage 5, identity versus role confusion, you're creating a narrative of yourself, a story that you tell that kind of hangs together, is cohesive, and provides a picture of you as you interact with your world and your group. Now, the first part of that is developing a sense of identity, a sense of who you are sexually, politically, vocationally, and sort of these identity structures. Now, the 6th stage, which occurs in early adulthood, is what Erikson called the intimacy versus isolation stage. And this is where you're trying to develop a sense of intimacy with another person. You're trying to bond with another person. But the trick here is you can't lose your sense of self, okay? You bond with another person, and part of bonding with another person and developing this intimate link is that you sort of begin to share a sense, you have a sense of shared identity. In fact, in a sense, you kind of have to lose some of yourself in order to meld with another person. So, you get married or you pair bond with a person, and then you have to think about their career needs as well as your career needs. It's not just about what your identity needs, it's about what another person's identity needs. And so he suggested that the main psychosocial task during this stage is to find love in a sense of intimacy without losing that sense of self that you developed in stage 5. And if you do, you develop the virtue, the capacity for caring and intimacy he called love. And that was sort of the virtue if you were able to navigate this stage. But you know what? Sometimes people are too willing to give of their identity in order to bond with another person. And he used the term promiscuity to describe that. Now, it may involve sexual promiscuity, but try to detach that term from its sexual connotation. And what he meant was just the giving of oneself too quickly to form a relationship. And some of you may know people who bounce from relationship to relationship to relationship and have trouble being on their own. It's almost as if they need somebody to complete themselves. You might call that sort of a promiscuous style. Not sexually promiscuous, but just in the giving of the self. And on the other hand, some people get so focused on becoming what they want to become that they can't make little adjustments to incorporate a relationship with another person. Maybe you're so hard driving for the career at the top that you give up love and everything to work and work and work and get that career going because you want to be VP. It's all about you. It's all about you. Some people are exclusive and that they're unable to give up aspects of the self in order to achieve this intimacy. But according to Erikson, the true goal was sort of learn how to meld with another person and give up part of your identity while still keeping your sense of individual identity intact. And what we're going to be doing over the next stages, generativity and stagnation and integrity despair, is we're going to continue to build this complex sense of self that doesn't just incorporate me. It incorporates myself and vocation. It also incorporates my wife, husband, domestic partner, whatever, my pair bond. And then later it's going to involve the larger community as I build a legacy. And all of these complex pieces come into creating this abstract sense of self that we have that's called an identity. And you know, people have identity crises all the time because they build this sense of self and intimacy and they find out that they don't have it exactly right. And they may actually go into a period of moratorium to try to change and reshape that sense of identity to include all of these pieces that we need. And some unhappy people are those people who aren't able to incorporate one or more of these important identity pieces that becomes important as we move into adulthood. Did I make any sense at all? I'm sitting here talking to a camera and it's hard to see if I made any sense. Xiao Yun, if you get it, send me a text to let me know. Andre, if you understood what I'm talking about. Let's go ahead and move on. Now, different ways of looking at romantic attractions in adulthood. Remember, I suggested to you the big psychosocial task is finding a sense of intimacy. So, of course, psychologists are interested in looking at romantic relationships. And we're going to talk about it from two ways. We're going to talk about, or from three ways. We're going to talk about it as the process of attraction. What is it that pulls us together and brings us, or doesn't pull us together? We're going to talk about love. What exactly does it look like? And then we're going to talk about relationships, what causes us to stay or leave relationships. So I'm just going to preview really, really quickly these three ways of looking at adult romantic attachment. And if you want more of this, you probably should take a close relationships class when you get to your four-year school. They don't have that kind of a specialized class here at Wake Tech, but at your four-year universities, most of the time they're going to have some sort of class on love and close relationships that you might find interesting. All right. But the question is, what causes us to be attracted to people? Your book talks a little bit about the research on attraction. And it turns out that people's first impressions may not always be accurate. And it turns out that people do have this stereotype, this stereotypical belief that's called the what is beautiful is good cognitive bias. So it turns out that if you look at two people, you just look at their pictures and ask to judge them in terms of who's more intelligent, who's a nicer person, who is a more honest person. It turns out that most people have a strong bias towards attractive people. And this is what's known as the what is beautiful is good cognitive bias. So if you've ever had a friend that is just absolutely fascinated with another person because they are beautiful, what you might find is they seem to miss a lot of the flaws in that person because they're so enamored by their physical attractiveness. It's the what is beautiful is good cognitive bias. Now, you know what? It turns out when we look at attraction, we also find that people who that familiarity does breed attraction. Not only are people more prone to say that somebody is attractive, has positive qualities, it turns out the more often you are around a person, the more attractive you will find them. So familiarity, it's called the mere exposure effect, and I talk about it in introductory psychology, and they talk about it in social psychology too. Actually, if you want to talk about close relationships, maybe you should spend some time in a social psych class. They'll cover this as well in a social psych class. But familiarity does breed attraction. If you find that person initially favorable, the more you're exposed to them, the more attractive you will find that person. There's actually a corollary effect called environmental spoiling. If the initial response or initial impression of the person is not too positive, actually more exposure can lead to an even more negative evaluation. They call that environmental spoiling. Now, you know what? People also tend to like others who are similar in attractiveness, similar in attitude, similar in values, similar in interests. All of these do predict attraction. And you can think about this from sort of you can think of it as consensual validation. In behaviorism, remember, we tend to engage in behaviors that are reinforced. So if I go out on a date with Susan and she laughs at all of my jokes, I'm going to, because we have a similar sense of humor, I'm going to find her more attractive, more rewarding. If I go out on a date with Naomi and we talk about politics and I find out that she's a liberal just like me, she is probably going to approve of or reinforce my political statements, and this reinforcement will make me want to go out with her again. So it turns out that similarity does breed attraction. In fact, physical similarity breeds attraction. If you put people in a situation, they've done these cool experiments where they'll get people in groups, get heterosexual group, males and females, and put them in groups. And what they do is they ask them to rate all the members of the opposite sex group in terms of attractiveness. So they can find out who's the most attractive and the least attractive person in that group. And then they have the people from the opposite sex group rate their group members, including them. And then you give people a chance to mingle and set up romantic dates. And what you will find is that people tend to pair off based on general estimates of attraction. So your two cute people will tend to pair off. Your less cute but still pretty cute people will pair off. And you'll see people tend to gravitate towards the person who is more similar in general attraction. And again, this might even be reinforcement. If you ask that person that is too physically attractive out and they punish you by saying no, that behavior is not reinforced. So you can think about sort of behaviorism as driving the way we tend to pair up with other people. We have a preference towards things, towards making omnibus statements of quality about people who are attractive. We find people who we are around more often as being more attractive, and we find people who share similar values or similar levels of attractiveness as attractive. So those are sort of the forces that bring us together when we meet other people. Now, I don't know if any of you were ever 16 and in love. I was at 16. I was in love. Oh my goodness. And we dated for 3 years, and we were going to get married and live forever into eternity. And my parents used to question my notion of love, and I never quite understood what they were talking about. But in trying to characterize all the ways in which people express their love for one another, psychological researchers have attempted to describe what is love and specifically how is it different from liking. There are several models of what love looks like and what love behaviors and what love thoughts involve, but your book focuses mainly on Sternberg's Triarchic theory of love. And this is a really good way that captures the elements of love that are described in other theories as well. So we're going to talk about this one. If you are interested, you should look in the, it's Gottman's liking versus loving is another theory. And then there's, I forget whose name it, but it's the wheel theory of love, suggesting that there are lots of different flavors of love out there. And you should check those theories if you find them interesting. But we're going to talk about Sternberg's theory. And what he argues is that what we think of as consummate love, perfect love, is just this blend of intimacy, passion, and commitment. All right? So, by intimacy, he's talking about the emotional intimacy that allows us to share our hopes, our dreams, our problems, our concerns with another person and get some sort of satisfaction from doing that. And you can have lots of relationships where you do that. If you have a best friend for life, you may have a lot of intimacy with that person. You may share your hopes and your dreams and desires. But are you in love with that person? Probably not. Another aspect of love that Sternberg talks about is passion. And that's sort of that arousal factor, that firing up of the amygdala that occurs when you see that person, and the activation of the hypothalamus that makes you want to engage in sexual behavior, the fire, the flame. And if you've ever had it or been with a person who conjures that in you, you know exactly what I'm talking about, the flame and fire of romance. We all feel it to a certain degree when we're in the beginning stages of a relationship. In fact, there's a theory called the stimulus value role theory, which suggests that the beginning part of relationships, this passion or stimulus is what drives relationships. But passion. Now, if you think about it, you can be passionate about a person. You can find them attractive. You can have the most amazing sex and still not be in love with that person. But you still have a flame, if you will, for that person. Now, and you might call that person an infatuation, a flame, a fling, if you will, right? But that's not love. On the other hand, he argued there's a third quality to true consummate love, and that's commitment. And that's what the preacher may say, for better or for worse. And that's that commitment to think about your partner's outcomes before your own outcomes. That willingness to sacrifice for your partner. That willingness to put your own ego away in order to support your partner. That commitment. And any of you who have ever been in a relationship for a long time will find out that sort of this commitment is really, that's the job of love. You know what I mean? Love is a job. It really is. Marriage is a job. And what you're doing is you're showing commitment to a person. You're being a company man, if you will. Right? Now, there are some people who are in relationships, marriages that have been there for a long time where the passion is gone and they may not be even be intimate, but they still act like a married couple because they are committed to the idea of being in a relationship. I would argue this isn't love either. They may call it love, but it's what we might call empty love. And so what Sternberg believes is that you can look at everybody's love relationship and you can sort of think of it as being a combination of one, two, or three of these qualities. So we sort of have, what do you call, unidimensional variations in love. So liking, infatuation, or empty love actually represents sort of love characterized by only one of these qualities. And then you might have two-dimensional love, which some people love in styles that combine two of these qualities. So you might have that couple that have been married 40 or 50 years, and the passion is really kind of gone, but they are best friends and they are totally committed to one another. So really, they're more like companions, if you will, than what you might call true consummate lovers. And you might call that companionate love. And then there's what he would call the consummate love. and you can think about each and every one of your relationships. Think about the love you feel for the person you're involved in. What blend of these three basic qualities does it involve, and what kind of love do you have? And you can actually look at different relationships and see how people express their love in these different ways. Love is a very complex concept. Really, it's hard to talk about it and explain it as being one thing. But I think Sternberg's theory does a nice job of explaining the variations in romantic attachments and love that people feel and express. Now, let's talk about the nuts and bolts. Why do people stay in relationships and why do people leave relationships? This is an area the model that we're going to talk about was pioneered by a lady named Carol Rusbult, who was a longtime psychology professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Woohoo, go Heels! And I got to know Carol Rusbult while she was still alive, and I even took her close relationships course. And you know what? Let's see, right here, intimate relationships. This was one of the books that we used in her class. I don't see the other one right now. But we talked all about relationships, and she had a model which she said she could use to predict whether or not people would stay or leave a relationship. It was called the investment model. And the question was, what makes people stay in bad relationships or leave good ones? Now, we might think of it as being in terms of how happy you are in your marriage, how often my partner makes me smile versus how often my partner makes me cry. But it is not that simple. And the neat thing about Carol is she sort of used a two-pronged approach, where she would go in and look at and study college students, and she would have them come in and fill out her questionnaires, and then she would have them come back in 6 months and ask them to see who was still in or who had left their relationships. And then she would also go out to practical settings like abused shelters for abused women and other places to ask women who had left tumultuous relationships, why they had left those relationships. And so she sort of did really cool applied college and real world relationship surveys to find out how the forces that cause people to leave or stay in relationships. And she argued that it's not your satisfaction. It's this thing called commitment that determines whether or not we stay or leave in a relationship. And so it's not one thing, it's a combination of factors. Now, the first might be your satisfaction level. So she, in her 29-item survey, she would ask you about how happy your partner made you and how angry or disappointed your partner made you. And the difference between your the positives and the negatives was your satisfaction level. She then asked people to talk about the alternatives. Is there another cute person that's interested in you? Are there multiple cute persons that are interested in you? How badly is the situation that you're in right now? You know, what could you do? Some females, some in sort of more conventional cultures where females are not allowed into the workforce, they may not leave relationships because they have no alternative means for survival, right? They may not be able to earn money. And so that may drive why they stay in an abusive relationship. So there are romantic alternatives, people who may be better looking. There's the happiness that you might feel from not being abused as an alternative. And then there are financial alternatives. Can I support myself? And then she argued that there's this intangible thing that we put into relationships that we can't get out. We'll call those investments. An investment is any shared resource, interest, or thing that was cool about our relationship that'll be gone if we dissolve the marriage. Think about all those wonderful Christmas Christmases we spent together when we were married. If we get divorced, all those Christmas memories will be gone to me now because I can't think back about our relationship. All those wonderful, warm memories are now shattered in a sense. If you and I as a couple had a bunch of couple friends and we got divorced, we would certainly lose some of those couple friends. Those would be investments that would be lost. If our kids, if we had to start sharing our kids and we couldn't have family dinners anymore together around the kitchen table, that's an investment. That's something that we can't get back when we leave this relationship. And so she would ask people about their satisfaction level, their quality of alternatives, and investment size. And she found that it was sort of a combination of these three different factors that predicted commitment level. Now, when commitment level, and the question is, what good is commitment level? She found that commitment level predicted whether or not a person would respond to a partner's negative behavior with a relationship maintenance mechanisms. All right. Now, so what are you going to do when you come home? When your partner comes home and says something really rude to you? What are you going to do when your partner comes home and you find Susie Q's phone number in their Rolodex? What are you going to do when your partner gets drunk for the third time and falls asleep? What are you going to do when your partner does X, Y, or Z? How are you going to respond to those negative relationship events? What Carol Rusbult found is that people with high commitment levels tended to respond to these negative relationship events with relationship maintenance mechanisms. They tended to engage in these sort of mechanisms. Accommodation is accepting your partner's negative behavior. Okay, and she argued that sometimes people also, so the main thing is that people would accept and learn to be loyal in the face of their partner's negative relationship behavior. They were more likely to forgive their partner for these relationship faux pas. People with high levels of commitment tended to spend their time derogating alternatives. That is, seeing other people as not being as good as they otherwise would be. Yeah, John may be cute, but he's not nearly as cute as my Stephen is, right? That's derogating the alternative. And if you've ever seen somebody that's truly, truly committed to a relationship, they sometimes become blind to their partner's the negative aspects of their partner, and they develop these positive illusions. They become willing to sacrifice. And what she found is that high commitment levels predicted an increased likelihood of staying in the relationship and an increased likelihood of engaging in relationship maintenance mechanisms. Does that make sense? Cultural variations. Now let's talk specifically about marital trends across relationship. Marriage rates in the United States have declined in recent years. I would argue it's one of the ways you can think about it is with regard to the investment model. There are more alternatives for people to remain single now. Why be committed when you've got all these alternatives? In 2014, 20% of U.S. adults, 1 in 5 people, has never been married. And you know, in 1987, all of us were thinking about getting out of high school, partnering up, and marrying by the age of 25. You know what? In 2019, the age for first marriage climbed to almost 30 years of age for men. I was married by the time I was 24, and my wife was 21. We were young, young, young. Some people do tend to get married in adolescence, but the stress and the pressures of developing these relationships before you really figure out who you are leads to a higher likelihood of divorce. Both my parents got married in their teens, both of them when they were 18, and both of my parents got divorced before they remarried and had me at the age of 30, right? And you know what? But the deal is, and what your book says, the average duration of marriage in the United States is currently just over 9 years. But you know what? Even given the negative likelihood and negative outcomes associated with a lot of marriages, emerging adults are still pretty optimistic about marriage and see it as a way to create a stable life. Okay, so let's switch on real quick. Uh, uh, do 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 do. Is marriage good? You know what? Yeah, actually it is. Even better, really, than cohabitating. I'm not sure what it is about the piece of paper that seems to be associated with less negative health outcomes, but it does. Happily married people live longer, healthier lives and feel less physical and emotional stress. But you know what? The process of marriage is a grind, man. When they said, uh, as long as you both shall live, they didn't tell you how long that really is. And one of the things you're going to find is that the bloom will fall off the rose, and you're going to become less happy with your relationship the longer you're in it. And if you look over here to the corner in this graph, what you'll notice is that over time, people are less likely to report being very happily married, with men being more likely to report being happily married than do women. And I'm not sure, well, there are any number of reasons why that might be. Does anybody have an idea? I'm not sure if anybody's still here yet, so I won't worry about the question. Okay. Divorce rate peaks about 10 years. You'll notice here's the divorce rate over the course of a marriage. You'll notice it increases precipitously through the first 10 years. If you can make it through the first 10 years, the divorce rate drops pretty significantly for the rest of the marriage period. So it's really that first 10 years. Why? Because you're learning about the other person, learning about their habits, learning if you can make a relationship together. You're having kids there. That's an extra stressor on the marriage. People are creating careers and have these different career trajectories. Any of these things may affect a divorce. There's adultery, there's domestic violence. Some people get married too young. Like I said, if you get married and you have and you change as a person, so you're more likely to get divorced. Now, your book talks a little bit about remarried adults. Men are more likely to remarry after divorce. And remarriage does seem to occur sooner for partners who initiate the divorce. It's almost like they knew what the next step was. And it turns out that second marriages are more likely to end in divorce than our first marriages. They're more unstable than first marriages. And you know what? Second marriages, they're going to be associated with higher levels of depression, but typically you're marrying into a better economic situation. So there is an improved financial situation. Now, neat study done by, I forget this Hetherington lady's name, but it was a longitudinal study of divorce and remarriage. She followed 450 families from Virginia. And what she found is that divorce is not as devastating to a family as most theorists would say. It's not great, but it's not devastating. And she also suggested that divorce is not a single event. Don't think of it as when I come in and say, that's it, I want a divorce. But it's a process of transitions involving the entire family as relationships slowly start to renegotiate to the new reality. Now, she followed people who got divorced, and she found out that there were 6 sort of characteristic patterns of how people responded to divorce. And I'd be interested in you knowing some of these patterns for the exam. So what she found was that there were the enhancers. These were mostly women, and these were the people who left a bad marriage and just bloomed and blossomed after they left the relationship. They might lose weight. They might get healthy. They might go pursue new education, change jobs. And she found that some people, it seemed like marriage, I guess, was sort of a bad thing for them. And getting out of it allowed them to bloom and blossom. These were the enhancers, and they were mostly women. The largest group were the people who were the good enoughers. You know what? They weren't enhancing, they weren't turning this into a great opportunity. This wasn't like they'd been freed from jail, but at the same time, they were still making it. They were dealing with the divorce. And I think this is a lot of people's experience going through the divorce. And what Hetherington found is that this was sort of the largest group of people who were coping with divorce but weren't necessarily blossoming as a result of it. Now, the question is, who was like really up to pursue another marriage? There were some people who left one marriage and were immediately on target looking for another marriage. She called these the seekers. And she found that while there were some males and females who immediately left a relationship and began looking for another marriage, but over time, this turned out to be mostly a male group. So in the beginning, you might see male and female seekers, but after a year or two, she found that this group was mostly comprised of males looking for another relationship. Now, a small group of the people decided, woohoo, I'm not married. I'm going to make up for missed time. And they were going to go out and drink and party and have romantic liaisons and just be free and wild and have fun. She called this group the libertines. And she found that while there were some people who started out on this pathway, most of these people grew quickly disillusioned with this empty sort of this sort of approach to divorce and joined one of the other groups. Now, 10% of the people were what she called competent loners. They were well adjusted. They flourished, they blossomed, they bloomed, but they weren't necessarily looking for new love like the enhancers were. The enhancers were just recreating all aspects of their life: personal, work and vocational, and romantic. The competent loners weren't necessarily looking for another relationship, but they were very well adjusted. They were happy as the enhancers. They just weren't interested in that relationship. And then there were some of the people which for them, divorce was an absolutely tragic event. So these are the people that didn't handle divorce well. And you might think of the person who's getting divorced because they have an alcohol problem. And the partner who's leaving them is one of the only person who helps control their alcoholic behavior. So when the divorce happens, this person spirals in an even worse arc than they were before the divorce. And she found that there were some, the defeated, who did not handle divorce well. Okay, now, hope you never have to get divorced. But if you do and decide to remarry, to take the plunge again, your book talks about some strategies for remarried couples. You have to be realistic about your expectations. The old person that used to be married to the ex had flaws. Don't think that by changing partners you are getting rid of all flaws. You have to have realistic expectations. All partners have strong parts and all partners have flaws that you have to learn to deal with. And the next partner is going to be just as flawed as the older partner. You're just going to have to choose whether or not you can live with those flaws. I'm one of the few people that doesn't have flaws. My wife will tell you, but for most people, you're going to have to learn how to deal with those flaws. Now, another thing is, don't just marry the person. When you were younger and you got married, you sort of developed this extended family with the in-laws and the aunts and the uncles. And, it was new and young, and so you developed this whole second family. Sometimes in the second marriage, later years when you're a little more set in your ways and you've already met one set of in-laws, you may not be as interested in developing relationships with the new in-laws. But you know what? It's a good idea to develop good, new, and positive relationships within those families. And from what I understand, we all have ghosts or what you might call old relationship patterns that we have. So when you were married to that last person, there were certain sort of negative routines that you may have settled into, ways of responding to the other person that were not relationship enhancing. We'll call these things ghosts if they come to the new relationship. Remember, this is a new relationship. It's a time for you to reinvent your relationship style. So try not to bring old patterns from the broken marriage into the new marriage. All right. Any questions? I am sorry for spending so long talking about this. I hope you were able to gain something from this lecture. Uh, I think I like this setup, and I'm going to be lecturing from here now on, so I'll be coming to you from my office, and hopefully the video quality will remain high, and we won't have any more live streaming problems. Does anybody have any questions for me? I notice we have just a couple of people left. Thank you to all of you who attended today. I appreciate your patience and coming on a Friday. Don't forget to do the discussion, to do the survey that's due tonight. It still looks like 3 of you have not finished the survey. So if you haven't completed the survey, finish it and send me the confirmation by tonight at 11:59 p.m. If you don't have any questions for me, I'm going to end this broadcast, but it was good to see you, and I hope to see you again next week. Take care.